At 2:17 a.m., on a quiet trading night, something unusual happened in the global oil market. Prices didn't just rise, they exploded. Within hours, crude oil surged more than 25%, blasting past $110 per barrel, the highest level the world had seen since the chaos of 2022. Energy traders scrambled. Governments made emergency calls. And suddenly, one narrow strip of water in the Middle East became the most important location in the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil flows through that tiny corridor. But now, ships were avoiding it. Storage tanks were filling. Production was collapsing in key countries. And the world's richest economies were considering an extraordinary move, opening their emergency oil reserves. The question was simple. Was the world on the edge of another global energy crisis? Oil markets react to one thing faster than almost anything else: fear. Not just fear of war, fear of disrupted supply. And that's exactly what traders saw. The conflict in the Middle East suddenly expanded, pulling in countries that sit directly on top of some of the largest oil reserves on Earth. Within days, Iraq's production collapsed by nearly 70%. Kuwait announced precautionary production cuts. The United Arab Emirates began managing offshore output carefully, and tankers started avoiding the Strait of Hormuz. That last point mattered more than anything else, because the Strait of Hormuz isn't just another shipping route, it's the artery of global energy. Every day, roughly 20% of the world's oil consumption passes through that narrow waterway between Iran and Oman. When ships stop moving there, the global oil system doesn't just slow down, it chokes. The reaction in oil futures was historic. US crude had already jumped 35% the previous week, the biggest gain since modern futures trading began in 1983. Then Sunday trading opened. Prices surged again. Within minutes, oil crossed $100 per barrel, then $105, then briefly $110. For traders, that number carried psychological weight, because the last time oil stayed above $100 for long was during another geopolitical shock, the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022. History was suddenly repeating itself. To understand the panic, you need to understand geography. The Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Yet through that tiny corridor moves oil from Saudi Arabia, oil from Iraq, oil from Kuwait, oil from the UAE, oil from Iran together. These shipments supply huge portions of the global economy, Asia, Europe, and even the United States. But as tensions escalated, tanker companies faced a new calculation. Insurance costs surged, security risks multiplied, and many captains simply refused to sail through the strait. The result was strange. Oil was still being pumped, but it couldn't leave. When oil can't be shipped, it has to go somewhere. Usually, it goes into storage tanks. But storage capacity in the Gulf is not infinite. Soon, countries like Kuwait faced a logistical problem. Their storage tanks were filling up. That's why some producers began cutting output, not because they wanted higher prices, but because they had nowhere to put the oil. Imagine a factory still producing products, but the warehouse is already full. Eventually, production has to slow, and every barrel removed from the market pushes prices higher. As prices surged, governments started moving quickly. The Group of Seven, often called the G7, scheduled an emergency call between finance ministers. Their topic was not military strategy, it was oil. Specifically, whether they should release crude from their strategic petroleum reserves. These reserves exist for exactly this type of moment, crude. In the United States alone, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has historically stored hundreds of millions of barrels of emergency oil in massive underground caverns along the Gulf Coast. Releasing oil from those reserves can temporarily increase supply. And sometimes, just the announcement of a release is enough to calm markets. That's exactly what happened here. Once traders heard that coordinated action might happen, prices pulled back. West Texas Intermediate dropped closer to $105. Brent crude eased to around $108, still high, but no longer spiraling. Meanwhile, the geopolitical backdrop remained volatile. Reports indicated that the conflict had escalated dramatically in Iran. Airstrikes struck targets inside the capital, Tehran. Leadership changes were announced. and tensions between regional powers continued rising. Some political leaders argued that the economic shock was a necessary cost. Former President Donald Trump, commenting on the spike, described higher short-term oil prices as a very small price to pay if it meant eliminating a nuclear threat. Others warned that prolonged disruption could destabilize global energy markets for months. But U.S. officials suggested the worst might not last long. Energy Secretary Chris Wright stated that tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz could begin returning to normal within weeks, not months. Still, even a few weeks can feel like an eternity in global energy markets. When oil prices jump, the consequences ripple everywhere. Airlines face higher fuel costs. Shipping becomes more expensive. Manufacturers pay more for transport. Eventually, those costs reach consumers. At the gas pump, in airline tickets, in grocery prices. Because oil doesn't just power cars, it powers modern economies. A spike from $80 to $110 per barrel might look like just a number on a trading screen. But that number quietly influences inflation, interest rates, and even global economic growth. So the real question isn't just about 1 week of price spikes, it's bigger. How fragile is the global oil system? For decades, the world has relied on a supply chain that runs through some of the most politically unstable regions on Earth. Every time a crisis erupts, markets remember something uncomfortable: a single choke point, a single war, or a single disrupted shipping lane. Can move trillions of dollars in the global economy? For now, the situation appears to be stabilizing. Oil prices have pulled back from their highs. Governments are coordinating responses. And tanker traffic may soon return to the Strait of Hormuz. But the episode revealed something deeper. The modern economy still runs on a system where energy security and geopolitics are tightly intertwined. Even in an era of renewable energy and electric vehicles, oil remains the backbone of global transportation and industry. And as long as that's true, events in one narrow waterway in the Middle East can still send shockwaves across the entire planet. So the next time you see oil prices flash across a news headline, remember, Bahone. That number is a complex chain of geopolitics, shipping routes, strategic reserves, and global economics. And sometimes, the fate of the world's energy market can hinge on a single strait only 21 miles wide. If you want more deep dives into the hidden systems that shape America and the global economy, subscribe to USA Uncovered. Because the stories behind the headlines are often far more fascinating than the headlines themselves.